My essential topic that I'm talking about today is Insension versus Ascension. And I look at the two completely differently. Sometimes there's concepts between the two of them that overlap depending upon which interpretation or definition you subscribe to. So you might find some of my topics a little controversial. If they do, I hope you still love me because I try to be, I try to be nice. If we look at Ascension first, there's a lot of talk about Ascension. And there's a lot of interpretation about that, whether it's in books we read, movies we watch, general feelings that we might have. And we have to look to really find out why we want to subscribe to those particular interpretations. What's your real motivation behind that? So if I look at Ascension, first of all, and I do fervently enjoy sci-fi type things. In the series of Stargate, there was an individual who attained ascension, and he attained ascension in the classical interpretation or classical definition of what we've been told to believe about ascension, whether we believe it or not. In there, he talks about, or in the particular episodes associated with it, he actually attains ascension where he reaches a height of an ascended master, literally turns into a ball of light, put the story short, and disappears into another realm to become pure energy. And he had to have assistance doing that. He was a little bit ahead of schedule because theoretically it takes thousands of years of karma. And it all happened in the space of a 5-minute interlude with an ascended being who helped him get there, who really wasn't supposed to do that. So I don't know how that applies, but hey, if it floats your boat, go for it, right? We all like to have the ascended being come in here and say, here you are, here's how to do it. Let me hold your hand and off we go. And that's exactly what happened there. Turns out he decided to go back to 3D because I guess he couldn't just handle space. Now, how that works, I don't know. They didn't really define. But that's movies for you, right? So there's also the overlapping that happens with this ascension concept. And that's where we get into Eastern Buddhism or Eastern philosophies that talk about how you're going to reach a state of enlightenment, become an ascended being. For one, I haven't met an ascended being. I don't know if anybody can show of hands. If anybody has, I'd love to chat with you because I haven't met them. Met some pretty wise people, but they don't seem to come across as being, a definition of ascension. So, maybe yes. If we look at the most recent stories or definitions of ascension, a lot of that comes from our Bible, and a lot of us have been from the Bible. I'm not going to say ours because it's not mine. I wouldn't want it anyway. But it comes from this story of Jesus rising from the dead and then hangs around with his group for a while, gives them some new information, and then ascends and says, hey, I'll come back again sometime later. Thanks for all the help and whatever. And then he's gone. And that always kind of bothered me when I used to read all that literature. And so as I looked at that concept, I started studying the history of it. That concept didn't start until around the 1300s. And it's a Latin term that we're referencing when we reference ascension, in the way it's defined like that. And I don't know about you, but I don't necessarily subscribe to a lot that comes from Latin definitions because I don't think the intentions of their expressions were in our best interest. To step off point a little bit, when it comes to definitions of word, it's a very powerful thing. If we look at the word apocalypse, I don't know what kind of thinking that is conjuring for you. What kind of image does that conjure in your mind? Predominantly, we get the or the notion that it's the end of all things. Everything's destroyed, all hell breaks loose, and it's the end of the world. But if you simply look at the definition in the dictionary, you'll find that that's the Latin definition. It all came from about the same time frame. Now, there's other aspects we're going to touch on too, which is happening in that 1300 time frame, 14th century time frame, that were very sinister and very much against our well-being and our spiritual well-being for sure. Because if you look at the second definition, if you read past to the next page, you'll get the Greek definition, which means to make aware, to reveal, or to open up. So technically, this so-called last book of this Bible that we have should have been called the Book of the Apocalypse, because it was written in Greek. It's a book of bringing to our mind awareness of what's going on. And it's been bent and twisted just by one simple word alone. So if it's one word that does that, how many more within that when we look at the time when that was so-called translated into a language that we could know, although Latin's not one of my first and favorite languages, but when it was translated therein, there was all the interpretation thereof of the time and the institution, political or spiritual, however you'd like to look at it, was actually very much in power, influencing our spiritual outlook on things. So I prefer the first one because I would like things to be revealed. And as I read it out, a lot of that stuff's already been done, and I'm not going to go down that road because I'm already done with that. So sorry for our biblical history, but I think it's very important because we cite a lot of terms that come from that origin. We don't have a choice. It's the way we were raised. We can think about things that our parents told us that stick in our minds, or commercials that we've heard on television, and you could pop it out and you'd probably remember it. It's called conditioning. So we've been conditioned to believe things in a very specific way. We've got to wait for something. We've got to look to an outside source for our information. And that's where it gets me into the concept of Insension versus Ascension. Personally, I'm not an Ascension candidate or an Ascension advocate. I'd like to be an enlightened person. I try to do that every day. But I don't see myself turning to a ball of light, disappearing, just become an energy person. And like in the series of Stargate, they sat around in a diner and just read the newspaper all day. That's wonderful. Not my thing. I'd like to do something more than that. And I certainly don't want to sit on a cloud with a harp and stuff. I want to be an influencer. I want to take where we are now and amalgamize into an ascended, or I should say an enlightened state where all possibilities are possible, where we can do literally anything. To me, that's real power. That, to me, is what really, whether you call it source or whether you call it God, I prefer source. It's a little less, gender specific, I guess you could say. It's where we are really supposed to go. It's what the program was that we are following, whether we like it or not. We are in a program, okay? We are in a matrix, just one that Source created. Source created it, whether it's a benevolent one or a non-benevolent one. It's a benevolent one. There are programs that are not, that are trying to lead us astray, which is what's going on in most of our 3D world right now. So if we look at what Insension is, though, Insension is where you find truth by lighting your inner fire. Because the only way you're going to know truth is if you look within, into your heart space. It's why we only have one heart. It's a point of singularity of the whole universe. It is a black hole. It absorbs all things. It brings it all into it, and we process that information. And how we process that information determines what we can do in this lifespan. I guess you could say the difference between the two is one looks out versus one looks in. If we look at the general definition of ascension, we're looking out. We're looking out to this distant plane of where we're going to get to through an entity or entities that guide us along the way, but it's not really coming from inside the heart. We're basically looking for God to help us. And that's what we've been taught to do. Say your prayers every night. Please, God, do this thing for me and make sure that everything's happy and bless everybody. If we rely solely on that concept of external unification of our influence, or the substance of our influence, you really lose your individuality. Now that kind of flies in the face of a concept that we talk about of the collective. But the collective is not what I'm talking about here. It's not that. You are an individual within the collective in the fact that we are in a fractal universe. Every element within a fractal is an individual element, but it's intertwined with all the other elements within it. So that's what heart space is all about. You are interacting on the heart plane when you go inside and not look to outside. Outside can be distorted. Happens all the time. It's distorted by definitions. It's distorted by people. It's distorted by, groups of people at times. Sometimes you want to leave the group you're in so you can find your own heart space. Again, movies are always fun, so I really like films from my youth, like Cinderella, that's kind of cool. But in this case, I really love The Wizard of Oz. If you look at the Tao of The Wizard of Oz, it's really kind of fascinating. Because here's this girl who's looking out to some other place. I got to get out of Kansas because it's not right for me. It's not my home. It's not fulfilling what I'm looking for in life. Okay, so she doesn't know it. But she goes into a very lucid dream state, and she's now taken to another plane of existence. Within that plane of existence are all these avatars or characters of influence that she comes in touch with. But the very interesting thing is all the way along, so before I get to that, so her first encounter is, whether it's the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, or the Cowardly Lion, these are all attributes of her personality that are coming forth that are teaching her things along the way. She's helping them, but she's really helping herself because they are all extensions of herself. Now within all this is the other, I think one of the key characters is her little dog, Toto. And I have this saying that of course, I'm a cat person. I have this saying that cats are the extraterrestrials that have come to save the human race. Okay? And if a cat loves you, you are loved, so that's a pretty good thing. Yeah. On the other end of it is I love dogs too, but I just don't want to have a dog. But cats are these astral things, Dogs are these 3D, structural elements that help us, stay planted here in this 3D realm. And so here's Dorothy walking through this whole experience of anguish and confrontation from her alter ego and also her primary ego. I mean, Jung would have a heyday with what, just doing an analysis of this. It would be really, kind of cool to see that. But through it all, she's always got Toto, and Toto's always there with her, checking out her counter personalities, making sure that the Scarecrow's a cool guy and the Tin Man and all that stuff. At the end of it all, they find out that all they really needed was permission and different things, little different tokens to suggest that they were okay. But one of the last scenes is very fascinating because here we find this wizard who's hiding behind the wall, and I kind of look at that as a lot of the things that we might call the deep state. The wizard, who's that wizard behind the curtain who's giving us all this information that's leading us astray, right? And they determine through Toto again, who reveals the curtain because that dog's the one who pulls back the curtain. I mean, nobody else thought to be. They all looked at it and they were afraid of it, but the dog wasn't. So her conscience, her Jiminy Cricket in this case, pulls back the curtain and there reveals the true source of misinformation. So that's a good thing. So we're taking 3D elements and learning from those 3D elements on a spiritual plane. Because the next level is Glenda, who's one of my favorite heroes, the witch. She's walking her through all these things. But, if you notice, she never really tells her anything the whole time. It's always like sitting down with an Eastern mystic going, what do you think of this? And they go, well, if the sun shines today, then the earth will move or the waters will flow or something. And you're like, how is that tangible to any of my existence? But in the end, it's extremely profound and we're all better for it. In the end, she's wanting to ascend because what does the wizard tell her? I'll take you home. Don't know if I'd really like to know where his home was. They don't go into that part. They just say, I'll take you back to Kansas, but where? Especially in nowadays, our present newscasts and things like that. And what happens? Toto sees a cat. Enter the cat. There's like 2 seconds of a cat in the whole program, right? I was wondering this at first, and I'm like, I know it's there. And then I watch this thing, I'm like, oh, there it is. Okay? So all of a sudden, here's this astral projection coming out, and the woman's just holding it. It happens to be a Siamese cat, too, which has some significance somewhere, I'm sure. And Toto jumps out of the balloon, runs after the cat. Now all hell breaks loose. But what's also interesting is the Tin Man's over to the one side, and he actually lets go of the rope. And so does the lion. They all undid the rope because the balloon was actually tied. They untied it. So who was talking to them? So her conscience is actually giving her the messages that, hey, this isn't really the place I want to go. So let's let that go. Okay? And then enter Glenda, and we all know the rest of the story because she grabs Toto, and then she says there's no place like home, which means to me there's no place like going into your heart space. Because that's all Glenda did. She just took her back and said, this is where you're going to find the answers. I think watching movies and all that stuff is just kind of like this really interesting travel down the Akashic, because especially the older ones, people were really tuned in. We're coming into an age right now, and there's a lot of disagreement. Some say we're already there. Some say it's not for 100 years or so, whatever. I look at other things and I kind of tie things together, and that's the concept of the Aquarian age. As I grew up in the 60s, I remember, the Age of Aquarius song. It was really cool, and and I didn't know what it meant because I wasn't into astrology then. There are others that say, like Blavatsky and others, that say we've been in the Aquarian age, or at least in the dawn of the Aquarian age, for 150 years. And so when it happens, then it happens. Then I started doing some other, studies on this concept, and we all have this wonderment about December 21st, 2012. What did it mean? I happened to be in Sedona because it's like, well, this is going to be a cool place. We're going to see this grand awakening because everybody's all hyped about it. It's going to be wonderful. People were ready to jump off cliffs into the vortex. Literally. I mean, the guy got arrested because he was going to jump off a cliff right at the right time so he could jump into the vortex and be ascended. I didn't know him. Otherwise, I would have told him about the other definition, right? It may not happen that way. It might be a hard landing, okay? But it'll be cool for the first 2 seconds. There was people that were extremely disappointed on December 22nd that we were still here. I'm like, are you kidding me? You guys are supposed to be, these 5D wonderment, and you're telling me that you're disappointed? People ask me, what am I going to do on December 22nd? I'm like, I'm going to be sitting down with Elizabeth Rauscher and feeding her pancakes. I don't know if anybody know who she is, but, she's a physicist. She's pretty cool. And she loved it. It was kind of neat. But that was it. She had a great recipe for it. I'm like, hey, come on over for pancakes. It's better than the restaurants, right? And that's as far as it went. But I was studying at the time a lot of occurrences that were happening through more of the Aztec Mayan influence, and however we want to call that, because there is some misinterpretation there. But let's just call it Mayan for sake of applicability here. The first thing that happened in 2011 in October was we as a species, or actually I should say, we as participants in the universe, because the entire universe hit its stage of the completion of its conscious evolution. We spent 16.4 billion years working our way up through conscious evolution. It relates to the 9-stage pyramid at Izapa, Mexico, that they uncovered, and then they found a calendar associated with it. If anybody's ever interested, a person by the name of Dr. Carl Kalaman wrote the book. Was it Mayan Age, or was I don't. I can't remember what it was, because Mayan Age was written by, I think, the person who published the book. Anyway, Carl Kalaman is the author on it. It's old stuff now, but it actually brings to light some very interesting things, because it's a study of the 9-step pyramid, where that is an example of our 9 stages of evolution, each one being 20% less than last, until we get up to February 2011, when we started our last phase, because it was 20% less than the one prior to that. And you can see different nodal points in time where this hit, 1999, different catastrophe elements which were integral or pivotal in how our evolution was to unfold. Throughout the first 8 stages, we were in what they call a 10-10 frequency. And I forget who it was. I think it was Michelle talked about how we've moved into a 12-base system. And a 12-base system is the system we should be in. It's much more secure. It's much more in tune with sacred geometry and the foundation of our existence. But there was the aspect of the last stage of our conscious evolution. We went from a 10-10 based that Plato said was the reason why Atlantis fell apart, because it was too perfect and it didn't have enough flexibility within it, to a 12-12 frequency for that last stage. And you could actually see a distinctive switch. It also marked, or what also marked the beginning of that, whether it was intentional or not, was when Fukushima exploded. We were all in Peru doing our, whatever it was we were doing, wandering around. And that's when it hit, because we wanted to be in Peru at the time of the beginning of this thing, because I'd been studying all this stuff, and wouldn't it be really cool to go study all these different things and tap into, maybe we can do stuff and find more things. And we did find some really cool things where none of the tourists went, which led to us getting arrested and what. Anyway, that's another story. Get arrested in Peru. It's really not good. Yeah, and the rifles they had, they didn't look like they even worked. They had cages. Anyway, they finally let us go, because none of us had our passports with us, and they finally took us over and got our passports. And then we all became best friends after they wrote a book on what they discovered, because it was their sense of purpose that they had something to do. And we left friends and buddies and all that stuff. So it was all good. But nevertheless, we did discover some interesting things, and we wanted to be there at that time. The aspect of this conscious co-creation evolution means that all entities, all living beings, all sentient beings in the universe reached their crescendo of their conscious evolution. Okay? Now we might say, we look back on 2012 and say, we haven't learned anything. We're still warring, we're still doing stupid things. We're out in the outer reaches of the universe, or in our galaxy, there's wars going on. They think we war. You go out there and see what happens, okay? It's all going on. It's a mess, right? They're all pointing fingers at us, and they shouldn't be. Nevertheless, no matter if you are an ascended being or just a regular being like we are here, not that we're regular, because I think we're exceptional, but everyone reached their conscious evolution completion. So they might be millions of years old, but they still had to complete it just like everybody else. Nobody escapes what the universe or what source has in store for everybody. It's all the same thing. We're all going to come together in one complete element, because that's, I believe, the true purpose of what we're here for, is to see the singularity of all beings, of all intelligence, of all consciousness in one whole. Yeah, you're making a circle. It's really good. Circle with a dot in it. That's, exactly, right? That's the alchemical symbol for a lot of neat things too, like gold. And I'll get to gold in a bit here. Another thing that's happening right now, I heard questions about what's the timeline for all this. Everybody wants to know when it's going to happen. Well, none of us can ever know that. We can say, well, there's indication that it's coming, and I can tell you it is coming. It's coming very rapidly because in light of what's going on, it's either going to happen or we're all going to go off the deep end somewhere. When we look at the Mayan calendar, getting back to 2012, as an analysis of when time frames are going to start transitioning, December 21st, 2012 marked the end of what they call the fifth sun. It's a day sun versus a night sun. In fact, in the 9-stage conscious evolution, each stage was comprised of 11 days and nights. 7 days, 6 nights. Or something like that. Sorry, my math's wrong. Anyway, there was days and nights. And within that, you had a time of light and a time of day, and we have to look at what the definition of night and day is also. So that gets us back to definition of terms. Day we think is grand and glorious. We look at it, it's white, it's open, it's light. We're looking out, we're seeing things, but then we go into the night, we can't see anything. It's dark, it's unknown, it's uncomfortable. So we tend to put a label on that as that's where evil dwells. Maybe I'll get into that in a second too. But in reality, neither of them are wrong. So if I look at the yin-yang symbol, everybody looks at that and says, I want to be on the white side, because that's the white side. But what we're misinterpreting is I don't want to be on either side, because neither white nor light nor, or I should say white or black, neither one has anything associated with evil or good at all. They're just balance. So we're looking for balance in our lives and thus in the universe. December 21st, 2012 marked the end of the fifth sun, and we stepped into the sixth sun. So right for a microsecond, on December, 21st, 2012, at midnight, right as at the stroke of midnight, and you would have to be in Giza too, because that's the center of the earth. And if you were on top of Giza, you might have felt a flicker of something. I don't know anybody who was there, because I don't think they let anybody on the thing at that time, right? So no one would feel that flicker of something. But that was when we had an exact equilibrium between two ages. Moving from the light into the dark. The overworld into the underworld. Oh my God, there's that term, underworld. It must be bad. It's not. That started a time frame of a 9-year shadow. I think most of us are familiar and try to exercise, good ways of being during Mercury retrograde. At least I do. I'm constantly following that. It's ridiculous. I mean, sometimes I can't make a move, except for, I love it when Richard, he schedules his appointments for doctor's appointments during Mercury retrograde, which I think it's a true interpretation of what you should do. It's a time of analysis. Okay? But we have this thing, and I'm sure we've heard the concept of the shadow. A few days before, a few days after, kind of watch it during that time frame. Don't jump off the boat until you're sure that you're satisfied with how the shadow's going or the shadow's over. Okay? So doesn't it stand to reason that an age of however many years the Aztecs calculated, it's something like 5,000. It's a divisor of the precession of the equinox. Okay, so 26,500 years or whatever many that is, divided by 5, and you'll get each one of their ages, as opposed to each one of our ages, where we're just tripping down through the zodiac, and we conveniently make each one of those 2,000 years which who knows if that's really the right number. And you got to take into account, does time shift and, with gravitational pulls and things like that, does it speed up, does it slow down? That might have an effect, but that's something for another day. This shift has, therefore, or I should say, doesn't it stand to reason that a shift of that magnitude, 5,000 years, would also have a shadow? And we do. That shadow is a 9-year shadow, at least from my studies. And it ends in a very interesting period of time, December 21st, 2021. Now, there's some more things that are really cool about historical additions to that, okay? The aspects that are happening during this time, I guess I could say, imagine, if you will, you're not the most altruistic person. Now, I know that's really hard to do in this present company because we all want to be super cool and good, okay? But imagine for a moment that you have ill intent and you have had lifetimes of ill intent, because more than likely you're part of the star family concept, which maybe I'll touch base on. I might touch base on it. It gets into gold and stuff. But imagine you could live for thousands of years and you were living for the last 12,000 years enjoying a time of total enslavement of the general population of the earth. At everything, every bidding that you did, at your every bidding, I should say, human race goes to war. It was like chess between the star families of these empires. They would just play off of each other, and we were the chess pieces, and they loved it because the bloodlust is incredibly ridiculous. Now, you've been doing that for the last 12,000 years at least. And all of a sudden, that's ending. You don't get to do that anymore. Yeah, excellent. However, how would you react? What would you do? I mean, really? I mean, you're this evil person. Well, you're not an evil person because I don't think any person's evil, but you're a person with a propensity to do evil things. And all of a sudden, your day in the sun is ending. And these are the last years of that shadow. What stops would you pull out to take as many with you? Because you're going. So I look at events that we're going through right now as being typical events of a cornered animal. And to me, that's a glorious thing. It's atrocious, but it's a glorious thing. Of all the things that we've heard. Although I do say this to everybody that I meet, please take a news fast. Whether it's ABC or whoever on the other side. Pick one. Whoever we like to listen to on YouTube, who's our favorite astral, informant. Take a news flash or a news fast from that, because both is on a state of frenzy, because we're under that signaling right now. We are under that frequency projection to break down any possibility of this happening. But what's ridiculous is it's going to happen anyway. Ridiculously good, which is, yeah, it's an interesting term. Ridiculously good. There's some things that have happened recently, one of which, because we haven't hit, December 21st, 2021. Oh, and I should say before I go into that, we have this reaction to this person who put together our current calendar, Pope Gregory the Fourth, I think. I think 1, 2, and 3 were absolutely, totally sinister and obnoxious. I don't know anything about the man, but I have a sinking suspicion that he was guided to go to study the Aztecs and redesign his calendar to conveniently fit in numerically with December 21st, 2012 versus a 9-year shadow on December 21st, 2021. So it's 12, 21, 12, and now it's 12, 21, 21. So there's a lot of synergy, and we get back to the 12-base system again. conjecture. I don't know. It makes good conversation at cocktail parties. It's like, wow, you know your numbers. So that's in the coming, that's in the making. There's a lot of things that happen. Well, we had on December 21st of last year, we had the great Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, which they called the divine conjunction. I was actually here that night, and it was a clear night, and I couldn't see it. I was looking everywhere. I probably should have been out in the water somewhere or something. I was like, damn, I didn't see it. I was all prepared, but it just didn't manifest for me. Nevertheless, that is a conjunction in Aquarius. Or that should say that conjunction happens every 20 years, okay, on that date. And every 20 years, different things happen. Rebellious things happen, whatever. So that's a common thing. But if we drag that out, because I'm going to get back to the fifth and sixth sun here in a second. If we expand that out and we look at events that have happened through history, and it also relates to who we are or who we are inclined to be, very much more, we more focus on the Cathar element of things, the mystics of the time period, all the things that they did. In fact, all the things that we look through history, anything associated that was mystically related. Look at the date that it was happening. It's a pretty fascinating study. Because if we look at the last time this conjunction happened, I should preface this first. Last year I talked about the star patterns that were going on, which actually put us in the same star patterns as the Civil War. Didn't we have a lot of contention last year? I mean, that was brothers, sisters, I don't care who it was. Every household on the planet was having an issue, right? They were breaking down. Last time that happened was during the Salem witch trials, which was another exciting, period of breaking people apart, actually smothering anybody that woke up. The time before that was the Renaissance. So we see these patterns of influence, very strong patterns of influence, that we can't deny nor resist. Doesn't matter what side of the good fence you're on. Or I should say the central fence. So if we look at this, the characteristics of this concept, and we go back in time, this occurrence happens about every 1,000 years. So the last time we had a star pattern like this in Aquarius, and it lasted for 200 years, was during the time of the Cathars, when they woke up. Now at that time, it started with the Bogomirs in Eastern Europe, and one man had influence, started a movement. At the end of the 200 years, they were 40 million strong. Almost all of Europe was following this principle. And it was, it was communal living and all this other things that you read about in a cursory manner. It was communal living, and they all loved each other, and they were paupers, and they didn't care about anything. But that is not really the core essence of what we're talking about. That would be like all of us saying, oh, yeah, let's just go live back in a commune. And I'm sorry, back in the 60s, communes didn't work because I was, exposed to a lot of that. What is really happening under the surface is everything that we are doing and studying and seeing manifest now. When we talked about spoon bending and putting pennies on the wall. 100 years ago, you would have been burned at the stake for even thinking that. My, how times have changed. Isn't it great? And that's just the norm. That's just like anybody. Just go up and just focus on the energy. Put the penny there. It's good. Take your mind out of the fact of whether it's glossy or, whatever, right? It doesn't matter. It's not the paint. It's the interaction. I mean, the coolest thing would be, I would be like, oh, I want to put it in the wall. And you do that. So those things are becoming the norm. The esoteric is becoming the norm. Everything that we do and think, it's coming from our heart space. So we're changing things. The key is staying in our heart space. So that's going to be where I keep getting back to. So during that time frame, the Cathars rise up, 40 million strong. What a movement. There was prosperity. There was peace. That's just for the regular people. But that's somewhat it's all about. I mean, if we're talking about a core nucleus of doing things that's working things and making things happen, you're doing it for the good of everybody. Not everybody gets why it's all happening or why they're following that movement, but they're all going to benefit. All humankind will benefit from the movement that goes forward that we will usher in or help to usher in or be the ushers at the start of it. And it's already started, but it's accelerating very, very quickly. So much so did this have an effect on things that there was a complete disregard for anything that was an institution. And the key institution that was ruling everything at the time was Rome. Okay? We can pick on them. And they couldn't stand it because you know what? They couldn't do anything for 200 years. Here's a movement of people that's getting stronger and stronger and stronger and bigger, and they're not paying tithes, and they're not taking into account that Rome even exists. Until the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction goes out of Aquarius, and the influence stops. And that was in 1300. And in 1321, the last of the Cathars was burned at the stake. I'm going to get back to that in a second. Because prior to that was the age of the Essenes. And if anybody here's really cared to study it in depth, Jesus was an Essene, okay? Had nothing to do with all that other stuff that's there in the book, okay? He was a high priest, and he was married, and he had children, and his wife was a high priest, and his mother was a high priest, and she was Egyptian. And that's why the Essenes came forth for the 200 years prior to his birth to give energy to his appearance. Now, whether he was supposed to be king and they were supposed to rescue this group of people who really didn't know what the hell rescuing was, because they always messed everything up, or whether that was the real reason or not, personally, I believe it was something completely different. Personally, I think it goes into the concept that most people don't ask in this whole, equation is, who was his daddy? I mean, they say he was an immaculate conception, but I don't take that. I mean, in other places in the Bible, if you've ever read it or cared to, it says angels came down and slept with, oh, that's all I got? Whew, I better speed it up. Thanks. Personally, I think he was a star being because, the Merovingian bloodline had to be reaffirmed. So we're going to speed it up. We're going to go back in time a little bit more, and we're going to look at the next occurrence that this happened was when Solomon built his temple. So if you study anything about what Solomon was doing, you have this huge influx of information or intelligence and intuitiveness, okay, that probably lasted for a shorter period of time because it fizzled very quickly. So let's get back to when the Cathars were destroyed. It took the church, I don't know how many years of inquisition to destroy the Cathars. That was their sole purpose. That time frame, and as I said, the last of the Cathars was taken down in 1321. When he did so, he brought forth a prophecy that he said, in 700 years, the laurel will again come forth, and love will again descend upon the earth, or again be resonant in the earth, and this time it will stick. 700 years from 1321 is right now, December 21st, or right in 2021. I'll get with you on how to spell it, but it was the closest pronunciation is Billy Boss. Yes. Look up Billy Boss 1321, and if you get with me after I've got it somewhere here, I'm not going to look through if you saw my writing, you'd be like, there's no way you can read this. So there you go. Yes, I should have been a doctor. It's in here somewhere. I've got it, or I know I've got it in somewhere notes and I could find it. Anyway, it is there. But yes, he brought forth that. So 2021 is the time of the loyal coming forth. It's however you want to interpret love, and I didn't go look at the definition, so sorry about that. I probably should have looked that one up. Nevertheless, I do know one thing. It's all about rebel energy. So don't take things lying down. Things are going to get rough. I will not lie to anybody. It's not going to be a cakewalk going into this time frame. Look at what we've already gone through for the last 9 years. There's still going to be a little bit of that happening. There's still control. However, the big difference is us going inside. When we go inside and ignite the gold within, when we become gold-based beings, there's how many know what Ormus is? White powder gold? Okay. Personally, I recommend not taking it because I think a lot of it is not done right. If you're going to do it, you've got to make it from pure gold, and you got to eat about this much of it. Look at the Egyptian hieroglyphs. They were to scale. Okay? But there was also some aspects to that was associated with control, because it did extend lifespan, but it was also used as control for the pre-bred kings and queens that were intended to be put in those positions so that control could happen. And how's the best way to control people? If I take it away from you, you die. So do what you say and you get your drugs. Okay? But that doesn't mean that we aren't gold-based alchemical beakers. We're living on a planet that's an alchemical beaker. Stardust is all full of Ormus. And guess what? The planetary positions of all the basically everything around us, one of the main reasons why we see the planets aligned with the pyramids, is that triple planetary system, which is not linear. We see it as linear, but it's not. It's actually a tetrahedral position. It's 3, like this, okay? It's funneling etheric stardust energy into this little blue planet in this solar system at the far distant reaches of wherever we are, because we've been visited here many, many times, genetically engineered many, many times. I don't know if anybody resonates with that, but I certainly do. There's supposedly at least 22 different DNAs represented here in this humanoid race. I think it's 24 because it's a much better nodal number, and I don't think Source messes around when it comes to patterns. The aspect of that occurrence means that stardust is funneled in through the poles, sucked into the earth. The earth is an alchemical beaker and literally turns that into gold. Processes it. We will never be out of gold on this planet, but it doesn't mean we should dig it up and give it to somebody else. It needs to stay there. Ask any Native American who's really true to a shamanistic, belief system, and they will tell you it needs to stay in there to feed Mother Gaia. It's essential. Really, it's essential to us. As we are sitting on the ground, walking barefoot or whatever, or just being here, we had to be made from alchemical, or I should say, test tubes or whatever, the beakers. We had to be made in beakers of clay, not beakers of crystal. So here's a definition that I'll throw out to you. When we say we are turning crystal, I don't think we're turning into crystal beings. We have crystalline structures within our beings. I believe we are turning into gold-based entities, because gold is the only pure element in the universe that can be a superconductor. And a superconductor means you can transcend time and space because you become light. Crystals reflect and channel the programming of light. I totally agree. But in referencing the detail of it, think gold, not crystal. To tell you the truth, every time I hear that, I see Lot's wife and she's a pillar of salt. I don't want to be a pillar of salt, so that's another story. So the outcome, to sum this all up, because I think I've passed my time, the outcome is that this awakening is coming intuitively. I can't give you a time or date. I just give you date. I just gave you dates. Okay. Another big date is December 4th, I think it is. We have a new moon, new full moon, lunar eclipse on December 4th. And the Aztecs marked that relative to the one that they had in something like 1989 when this whole convergence started. So we're marking the ends of these times these time frames, which do have a resonant quality to them. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been marked for us. Okay. So our intuition is blossoming, it's growing, but it's not going to be without what they call, I love this term, existential angst. Look that one up. It's pretty fascinating, because what it means is when you step into the unknown, you have anxiety. And some people can't take it. Some people won't be able to take it. And I can't stand up here and say that I don't think that's true. I see a lot of people checking out right now. But for those of us that have made the decision to be here, because actually we have made the decision to be here. And in reality to that, the secret really to our happiness and virtue is, one, liking what you do have to do here, liking what you programmed to do. Nobody ever thinks about this. Well, some people do. When we die, or when we transition, whatever, when we pass over, we go to a place and we sit down and analyze all the things that we did during this past lifetime, and then we reprogram ourselves the karmic lessons that we are willing to endure in the next. So if there's an issue that you are having, it is part of your karmic programming. In other words, you are the God that set the stage for where you are right now. So in order to be in tune with yourself, you have to begin to like, one, who you are, two, where you are, and three, where you're going to go, because you programmed it. And we are getting to the point where we can tap into that Akashic and learn more about what that specifically is, rather than who we were. I don't care who I was. I'd like to know what I knew, but I only want to know what I programmed. I know, he said it already. Thanks, Dixie. Okay, I think I'll say this. I'll sum it all up by saying the energy of the Aquarian age, whether we're in it or not, although I think we're firmly in it right now, the energy of the Aquarian age brings the cosmic patterning that comes with the tools of Insension, which is basically all things and all places where we want to be. When that happens, anything is possible, because we will be 3D optimized, because I don't want to leave that. I'm okay with this body. Okay, I'm not ready to check out. I want to be 3D optimized, living forever with 5D potential. So if I'm a gold-based unit and I am a superconductor, I can say Alpha Centauri, and I will be there instantaneously. I can say to this mountain, remove yourself, and it will. I can influence, like we are doing now. We are seeing the collective capability of the energy of our influence. And I better stop there, because I'm just beginning to ramble right now. Thanks. Oh, do I have to? Okay. Do you want me to go on all day? No. Okay. Questions? Anybody have questions? Sorry, I didn't even do that. Oh yeah, we can ramble on all night. Yes. Come to the card table. We were there till 3 a.m. I mean, sorry. Basic. Okay, the question was any elements about 11, 11, 11, right? Not specifically, other than when I go into the standard numerology, 11, 11, 11 pops up all the time, because hey, it's one. You go into numerology of the 9-year cycle, that type of thing. Yeah, but I haven't hit anything on 20, like December 11th, for instance, or December 11th, 2021. Oh, 2011. The biggest occurrence in 2011 was October of 2011, and there was no real significance to the specific date, but that's when Coleman talked about, when he marked out, that was the completion of our conscious evolution. I did feel and subtly see aspects of change. In other words, on the side that wasn't to our benefit, anxiety started to grow, right? And then in 2016, I saw a distinct split, even amongst the esoteric element. Some people woke up and came back, because around 2011, a lot of people, it's kind of an interesting time as I think about it. In 2011, a lot of practitioners, right? Healers, whatever you want to call it, light workers. A lot of them said, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to do this anymore. And it was one little trigger, stupid little trigger that they've had millions of, but they just said, forget it. But then in 2016, they all came back saying, it's like spirits just said, I'm sorry, you don't have a choice. It's now time to wake up again. And they woke up with a fervor, and it was awesome. I mean, if you look at, like, I don't know if you know who Barbara Hand Clow is. Okay, look at her flow. She crashed and burned. I thought she was going to drop off planet, right? But then she got back into the swing of things and stuff. And I've seen that a lot of the mainly the matriarchs, right, of the movements. They just got tired, because I think everything came down on them. I think that's also an element of 11 too that we don't think about. We look at it going, oh, it's great, but no, it's not. There's another side to it. Yeah, it's like, which side of the coin did you land on, right? Anybody else?
No.
No. Okay.